So, as a kid, I really loved dressing up my Barbies. The dolls in princess dresses and all too chewable high heels were my favorites, and if some were unlucky, they were accompanied by a Ken. The Kens never really drew my attention, and Ken certainly couldn't wear a dress. His model was far too broad-shouldered to squeeze into the narrow dress. Little did I know, this would be a future lesson in womanhood to 7-year-old me. The cultural definition of womanhood is as rigid as the miniature seams on my old Barbie dresses. Furthermore, intersubjective norms, which are norms that are encouraged by an individual's community surrounding gender presentation, like the purchase of Barbie dolls and their dresses, are the primary ways in which children are taught gender expectations, according to a 2022 article published to the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. These intersubjective gender norms are also present throughout American literature, and there is a trend in how women deviate or intentionally utilize these norms as a means of characterizing them, through characters that fail to, or intentionally utilize the performance of womanhood. An investigation of the rigid structures of gender identity must take place. Characters from the prose The Man Who Thought Himself a Woman, Martha's Lady, and from the novel Behind a Mask all perform gender in specific ways that reject what may be typically expected, allowing further insights regarding how gender deviancy is regarded today. First, the principal Jean Muir from the novel Behind a Mask by Louisa May Alcott utilizes the conventions of femininity to partake in deception. In her first scene, Jean Muir is intentionally weak and gentle. She has meek obedience as she tends to the family and their requests for her to prove herself, which she dutifully fulfills. However, in the eyes of some, Jean Muir is suspicious. Other characters refer to her as uncanny and an uncomfortable creature. While Jean Muir is performing femininity sufficiently enough, she still drops indications that she may be distanced from the standard of womanhood. It's likely that these serve a metatextual purpose, that being foreshadowing to Jean's deception. But they also further debilitate Jean's status as a typical woman. And this may indicate, in a narrative sense, that Jean Muir is engaging in wrongdoing and ought to be punished. In the inherent construction of Behind a Mask lies the notion that promiscuous women like Kelsey Collins speaks of, who were published in several newspaper articles and are convicted and are on death row, the notion that characters such as these women and Jean Muir are deserving of their punishment. While Jean is never punished for her deception, the notion that a character such as Muir may be innocent or simply acting to ensure her own well-being is never proposed. Furthermore, the absence of punishment may only embolden the fears surrounding other women who are intersubjectively prescribed the trait sexually deviant. As a result of this, rigid, harmful expectations that were violated are strengthened and passed along to others. Second, Sarah Orne Jewett's prose Martha's Lady plays with the violation of gender norms to define a relationship between the two main characters. Jewett's short story lacks significant male characters and instead focuses on two cousins, Harriet and Helena, along with their maid, Martha. The initial conflict in the prose is that Martha is not sufficient as a waiting woman. She is non-domestic, described clumsy as a calf. And this clumsiness may be a way to say that Martha is loose in her conformity to traditional gender roles. This slipping in femininity is most explicitly seen in a scene where Martha climbs a cherry tree for Helena, which is explicitly set up by Helena longing that a male companion would climb the tree for her. By placing the cherry picking in a cause and effect organization, Jewett forms a strong connection between Martha and masculinity. This may be done to place Martha as a man replacement for Helena, as Jewett strongly implies that Martha, who can fulfill duties that Helena may otherwise rely on a man for, is just as suitable as a spouse. And in this way, Martha is very explicitly queer-coded as a character. By deconstructing a heterosexual relationship into a manly figure and a girly figure, Jewett can suggest that Martha and Helena work as a couple. In discussing queer coding, it's important to acknowledge that this heteronormative structure is often not an accurate reflection of how real-life queer people exist in their relationships. However, given that Martha's Lady was published in 1897, coding a relationship between two women as being like a relationship between a man and a woman was vital to telling a sapphic story. In this way, intersubjective gender norms about how men and women are supposed to act may be beneficial to understanding the relationship occurring beneath the surface of the prose. Today, queer coding is still standard practice in suggesting that characters might be gay. Consider the state of fandom culture, in which it is still common practice for female characters who may be more masculine to be headcanoned as sapphic. This headcanoning in fandom culture indicates that playing with intersubjective gender norms on the part of writers can give further insights about relationships between fictional characters. Third, the pivotal character conflict in the anonymously published short story, The Man Who Thought Himself a Woman, is centered around a character who is unable to fit into externally prescribed intersubjective gender norms and how they are harmed by the prescription. As the title foreshadows, the prose follows the transgender main character, Japhet Colbones, who is raised as a male, but later discovers that they prefer to live as a woman. While the prose does not play on the surprising reveal of Japhet's gender identity, it gradually foreshadows the rest of the characters discovering Japhet's identity in a tragic utilization of dramatic irony. The Man Who Thought Himself a Woman gives direct offerings of intersubjective gender norms and how those who disregard them are viewed. In fact, these norms are so vital to understanding the characters in the story that the author spends the first 1.5 pages divulging how the men of the Colbones family are not perfectly in line with these norms. This establishes and reminds readers of the expectations that they hold for masculinity. For example, when Japhet's elder sister's clothes disappear from their drawers, it would not be incorrect for the reader to assume that Japhet was the one taking them as a part of their gender transition. However, instead of suspecting that Japhet would be taking them, the sisters first suspect that Japhet's new wife must be taking them, but they ultimately conclude that the house must be haunted. This conclusion is reflective of the state of gender flexibility for Japhet, and is stated to be the reason that they take their own life at the end of the prose. The stifling intersubjective gender norms that contained Japhet to a male identity intentionally demands a confrontation of the expectations society holds about gender, placing the harm that these norms have in the spotlight. It does not need to be established that gender norms today are as rigid as they were when The Man Who Thought Himself a Woman was published. Furthermore, it goes without saying that transgender people today are still hurt by intersubjective gender norms, creating discourse in this discovery of their own identities. In contemporary application, it becomes much more beneficial to examine the future of gender deviancy in American society. Just 4 months ago, dozens of students at the University of Oklahoma, a mere hour from Edmond, gathered to demonstrate support for Mel Kurth. Kurth was placed on administrative leave by the university for a grade she gave to an undergraduate student, Samantha Fulnecke. The Fulnecke situation remains ambiguous, but suffice to say, the reflection paper that received a failing grade from Kurth was not based on a First Amendment right to religious freedom. Kurth acknowledged this in her feedback, though condemns Fulnecke's hateful language. And this is a harrowing reminder of how gender deviancy is regarded today. It is perfectly acceptable and deserving of a citation of recognition from the state government to thoroughly and baselessly condemn those who don't conform to the norms that have been established as the standard. Adherence to or division from gender-typical behavior is a primary way in which many characters can be defined. They can be crucial in understanding how an author wants readers to interpret their characters, but more significantly, they can be demonstrative of common mindsets regarding gender norms. By viewing several characters spanning from Alcott to Jewett, a greater understanding can be achieved about how intersubjective gender norms not only influence readings of literature, but also reflect contemporary attitudes about gender deviancy. Despite the tight seams on the clothing of gender roles, people who stretch them out have been and always will be around. And for the record, Ken can totally wear a dress.